ask you an important question. For all the striving for success, fulfillment, inner peace, have you ever felt like maybe, just maybe, you're chasing something you already had once, a long time ago? Not something you have to invent, but something you could return to, a sense of feeling alive, curious, at ease in your own skin. Welcome to Unfaced Under Fire, where we explore what it really means to lead with clarity, courage, and heart, especially in a world that often feels like it's asking us to harden, to prove ourselves constantly, to push through. Whether this is your first time joining us or you've been on the journey with us before, I'm really glad to see you all back on the show and listening. Today, we're going to be beginning a 3-part series, not about going backward or acting like a kid, but about reconnecting with something we all once knew, the energy, wonder, grounded aliveness that many of us felt as children. Before life taught us to shrink, to armor up, to second guess, there was a vibrant way of being that lived within us and still does, although buried. Now, as you likely know firsthand, we're living in an era of relentless pressure, AI-enhanced information overload and increased deviceness, etc. But even with more knowledge than ever before, many of us feel lost and confused. We know what to do. We don't necessarily feel the vitality and the clarity to do it. And as executives and professionals, we've built systems to achieve, and very well, they're honed, they work. But in the process of creating these systems, many of us lost touch with what makes us feel truly alive. This is the cost of over-adulting, the prison of compensation patterns and false beliefs that we spoke about in our last series that tell us success must come at the expense of joy. And that brings us to today's conversation, a journey of coming home to that real vibrant part of you that's still there beneath all the roles, the goals, and the grind. We're going to explore that journey together with my 2 great co-hosts I'm honored to have who's joining us, Anatoly Yukharev and Ryan McShane. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Now to start, we're going to do a retrospective from one of our shows. And I must thank Ryan, who is the inspiration for this series that we're embarking on today. The idea came from a powerful reflection you shared at the end of our Executive Resilience Crisis show that aired back in March. So to kick us off, I'm going to share a clip from that show and then give Ryan some opportunity to add some color to it after we watch it.
I had an opportunity a few weeks ago after one of our podcasts where I experienced that heightened state. Just as a result of having an hour and a half long conversation, I was on a roll. I was in that flow state. I was able to articulate a bit more clearly, and my awareness was heightened as a result of it. And mind you, I haven't gone through this resilient leader method. This is just from the experience of interacting with you 2 gentlemen around this particular topic. So I took this opportunity because I really enjoyed the feeling of it. And I said, I think that by sharing this with other people, it will deepen my experience and what I'm feeling. So I did. I took that hint and followed my intuition and shared this with 2 friends and colleagues. And as I was describing this to them, I could see their eyes widening and saying, wow, where's this been? I would love to have this kind of thing. And I like your analogy about the 12-year-old driving the Ferrari. That's something that definitely resonates with me in terms of the experience and feeling. I had a new mode of operating that was much faster, sleeker, and better in all aspects. And as I shared this with other people, they were like, where can I sign up, so to speak? Imagine being made anew. You guys talked about a reset, resetting yourself. I kind of think about it as being made new. You have all the energy and the wonder and the awe that comes with being a younger child, but not all the drama and the weight associated with life experience. Imagine what that would unleash in you.
Yeah, you still have the experience, the wisdom that you've attained. In fact, the wisdom goes deeper. You get to understand more what you went through and why it was valuable and call that and mine that gold, if you will. So that was pretty powerful point in that show. And I remember really enjoying you sharing that, Ryan. But would you like to just, follow up on that, add some color to it, some thoughts?
Yeah, certainly. And it was a powerful experience for me as well. And I delighted in not only the experience, but sharing that with someone else, with my colleagues, as I had mentioned, and having them immediately resonate with what I was talking about. That sense of kind of a homecoming. We've used that term a couple of times, coming back to who you truly are beyond conditioning, beyond, the weight of the world that we've all been exposed to as we mature and go through life and have life experiences and different traumas and things of that nature that kind of weigh us down and put up our guards and protections that is so customary for many people. And it's fascinating. As I was listening to the clip again, a thought occurred to me about kind of dying unto yourself to truly live and throw off the world for that full embrace of life. I think of my son when he was a little boy, and we would wake up in the morning and go to his room, and he'd be standing in his crib with a grin ear to ear and jumping and just so
ready for the day
to start the day. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I envision or experience when I go through those heightened states, is that element of just embracing life fully for what it is and not being so mired with all the complexities and the demands and the responsibilities. Of course, they all exist, but I'm able to address them from a point of clarity that hadn't existed before, which is just remarkable to me because I've not experienced the juxtaposition of that in my life prior to that point. Now, I'll also comment, and I shared with you guys before we hit record, that's an experience that I have each and every time we have this podcast. And it lasts for hours after the podcast. And I also noticed that when I really lean into and focus on what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing in terms of that heightened state, it also extends that period of time and deepens that experience for me. And so I'm able to kind of not only extend it, but I think that I'm able to snap back into it post every one of these podcast experiences where we have these kind of exchanges. And I think it goes beyond just anything that's cerebral. It's something deeper. It's definitely more holistic. It's mind, it's body, it's spirit, it's heart. It's all of those things. And it's just, you can tell that it's something special that's happening. And it's like I said, that homecoming, that nature of that sense of homecoming, that you always knew that this was something that was a part of you, that was a part of your existence, but you've almost forgotten. And now you're starting to get that glimpse once again of how it can be and how it should be. And I tell you, I delight in that experience.
What you're sharing is not just a touching moment. It's a mirror that reflects back something you remembered about what it was like. That unexpected access to aliveness and ease and energy, it wakes that memory up of us of what it was like. And we hear this all the time from people that go through the Resilient Leader Method, that I feel like I'm 7, 8 years old with all that benefit, but with the wisdom and the experience and the good stuff that came with me as an adult. Yes. That I can engage. That's what I want to dive into a little deeper now. This thing of growing up and becoming an adult. And as a kid, sometimes I go back and remember, I wish I was older. And now I go back and say, no, maybe I should have said, just enjoy where you're at right now, baby, and get the most from it. So let's go back to revisit this adulthood that we've come into. And we've accumulated all this knowledge, but when you revisit that place that you just said, Ryan, you realize I haven't really felt whole like this until this moment. And that means that I didn't feel integrated into myself, in my feeling in my own skin before. And now we look at the world that's created all this technology, and we're probably creating more information in 2 weeks now than was created in all history beforehand because of the advent of AI. And yet we seem to know what to do. We seem to know what actions to take. That should be enough, right? I could go, get a Kindle book and know how to be an entrepreneur over a weekend. What keeps me from really stepping into it? So I just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, as you had indicated, we are dealing with unprecedented change and complexity. And you mount that on top of what we've used the term several times of emotional hijacking or amygdala hijacking. So you've got this combination of complexity, advancements in technology, increased responsibilities, all the stresses that come with that. But then you have an external environment that is constantly vying for your attention and trying to manipulate you from an emotional standpoint. So it's no wonder that we're all stressed out. It's no wonder that we're all preoccupied with all of these responsibilities. And I can't emphasize enough the emotional hijacking component of this, because, external to us, everyone's trying to manipulate us in some way, shape, or form. And they know the effectiveness of being able to tap into those emotions to get you to have some kind of response. And it's the old Hegelian dialogue of, problem, reaction, solution. And so the really smart and manipulative people out there, the schemers out there, are trying to constantly create a problem, knowing the reaction you're going to have to stimulate the response that they're looking for. And so combine all those things together, the complexity, the emotionality, the stresses, the rapidity of change. It's no wonder that we are distracted and unable to be fully alive and fully ourselves, because we're constantly, it's like the Matrix, we're dodging these bullets all the time and trying to make sure that we stay alive in that. And from that standpoint, the survival is the key response. And we remember from Maslow's hierarchy of needs that survival is that lowest rung of the pyramid. And we really want to be operating that self-actualization. And that's the experience, that wholeness, that homecoming that I described in that clip. That's the experience that I get from having these exchanges. And what ultimately I believe that the resilient leadership method implements for people on an ongoing basis, not just, you get this experience for a little while and then it fades away. I think that the resilient leadership method, from your stories and what you guys have shared with me, is something that sticks with you. And it has to be integrated through coaching and things of that nature. And as I remind the audience, that's not something I've been through. These are heightened state of experiences that I get from having these exchanges with you guys on a weekly basis when we do this podcast.
Well, soon coming, we're going to have to do an after show when you go through the reset in June, and you can share what the experience is like once you are grounded in that state. And that'd be a lot of fun. You really said a lot in what you shared. There's this evolution that we go through as human beings. We come into the world, and for a certain number of years, maybe up to 6, 7, 8, we're in this kind of place of, wow, it's so fun to be alive and go out and play and enjoy our lives. I thought maybe this would be a good point for you, Anatoly. Talk a little bit about the evolution and maybe talk about how brainwave states relate to that and what happens as we begin to tamp down. And we've touched a little bit of on previous shows with beliefs and other leadership development and those kinds of things to why this is happening. But I think this is a good time to a little bit talk about, okay, what was going on when we were a kid that was allowing us to be in this state of mind and a way of being. I had a client that's is like, as a little girl, and she's like 7 years old, and she gets too hot. She just takes off her clothes. She's just sitting there in the moment saying, I'm too hot, and it's kind of, at the same time, it can be terrorizing to a parent. They're also giggling in the background saying, like, how could you get mad at her? She's just trying to take care of herself. So talk a little bit about that evolution and how we begin to, where we were at as kids and how we then tamp that down.
Well, let's start with the fact that, the way our brains work when we're younger, especially at a time when we are 5 or 6 or 7, we are still operating out of the theta band brainwave spectrum. So which gives us a very heightened perception of the outside world, how we perceive things, how we interact with the physical world, and how we process anything that we experience. So we can only sometimes look back and reconnect with that part of our childhood when we go into that heightened state, because suddenly we have this ability to tap back. But why is it happening? Why is that we cannot extend it beyond the early puberty and so forth, and suddenly we just realize that we have completely switched to being adults? And that's why this innocence horizon thing arrives. By the way, when I first experienced this innocence horizon, shift from being a child to like a young adult, I was 20, and I was thinking I was having a mid age crisis. Like, why is it happening to me? I'm only 20? What's going on? So My ex-wife then, she said, like, can't be happening to you. You're just 20. I said, like, but it feels like I'm this close to die. I mean, this is it. So this could be a very deep experience of shifting gears. But for children, especially imagine if you're a child and you operate out of theta and you can connect to the world at a much deeper level than people around you, even your friends. And I remember when I was that age, I would like navigate the woods, go out, talk to trees, talk to stones, have a nice conversation with the lake. I was fully immersed. And my friends, they used to say like, why you spending time with that tree? We are right here. Let's go play. I said, guys, I know what you're going to say. Sorry, but that tree has got an interesting story to share. And they would go like, once you're done, come back to us, we'll play. So the richness of any experience at that age could be only appreciated when we get to a point that we can reflect and have some filtering mechanism to realize I had that invisible friend. Because I remember my experience with my invisible friend when I lost my wallet. I was like, I had all my money there. My mom's going to kill me. And then my invisible friend would say, hey, I have taken care of that. Go back up and you see that tree that you talked to? Right up between the two twigs, you'll find your wallet. I would go back, climb up the tree, and it would be sitting right there, nestled between the two twigs. So that's how I learned to appreciate that the distinction between the physical world and the invisible world was not that much of a distinction. You could interact with both, but you have to respect the rules of engagement. Now, to what extent our brain waves were involved? Maybe they were helping us to fine-tune to a different type of reality that we kind of outgrow and we can no longer connect to. So that's why when kids talk about invisible friends and stuff like that, we have to respect them because they do interact with something. And apparently they find, solace and refuge in the fact that they interact. Now, theta brainwaves are very powerful. It's really a treasure chest with things that help boost our capacity. But we have talked about that a lot. But when we shift to being older, we go into beta, we learn to rationalize the world, we learn the rules of societal engagement, how we need to behave, what we need to do, and all that. And that magic that we had as we were kids gradually fades away. And we lose touch with that unless, like you, Ryan, said, suddenly you go into that heightened state and you're able to go back and reconnect with the state. It doesn't have to be a vivid memory. You reconnect with the state. And because of the quality of that state is good enough for you to know, it really is magical.
Beautifully said. I think as you were going through that, I was seeing kind of operating in the beta state, which we do up to age 7, 8 years old, that invisible friend, like we talk about, you need to reconnect to your true self. In a certain way, aren't we potentially tapping into that wiser core self as a kid because we're opened up in theta, which allows us to have that relationship? Is that fair to say? And as we start learning the rules of engagement, and we're, and this is where trauma can come in for kids is, parents who are a little bit controlling or to a high degree controlling see that effervescence, that pulling off my clothes when it's too hot, whatever. And they then begin to react to that like there's something wrong. The kids are just in the moment. They don't understand the rules. They're fully present, engaged, enthusiastic about what's going on right there, or upset about what's going on there. And in both cases, we're too much, or we're doing something that may be embarrassing the parents shut it down. So we start getting subtle messages, that's not okay. Or we get mad and we get angry and our parents tell us that's not okay to be mad and angry. So we begin to start shutting that down because as children, and this is well researched, kids believe it's about them. They haven't understood that things are separate in certain ways and it is about other people and other events. It's not about them. And they personalize it. And then as we go back to the show that we just did, they begin forming beliefs. And then as that begins to happen, eventually we hit that middle 20s crisis, or for a lot of kids, it happens 13 to 15, when that existential crisis hits. Like, life isn't what I thought it was. I better figure this out. I better come up with some strategies and compensation systems to be safe and okay. And so people like me, either through my achievement or through my knowing how to be a good salesperson when I'm young, or knowing how to begin to manipulate situations, because that allows me to get what I need, right? So all that begins to kind of weigh us down. So I want to talk a little bit about this sense of us drifting away from that essential experience we had as children, something that came naturally to us before we became good at being adults. There's something in us, though, remembers that. And I'm wondering if even those moments of flow that we all experience, whether it's going on vacation and finally second day you've let go of the stress and you're sitting out looking at the ocean, and all of a sudden this experience seems to open up again. That seems to be what happens. So we want to emphasize that this is not something you've lost. You've just buried it. So we have people in personal development and leadership development kind of injects this. You have to have your purpose. You need to be grateful. You need to have balance. You need to take a moment to be present, right? And almost like we're relearning something on top of what's truly there to naturally be that, right? We're trying to reverse engineer back to that state of those things. So what is that longing? What is that longing about? I need to step back and really reflect. Is that a moment of longing for that? And what is that longing about?
Yeah, I think we're separating from our heart center to a certain extent, and we're jumping into our left brain mind, where it's all a calculus of how do I need to operate. And we've had these discussions before. I think we are predominantly a left brain society in terms of, we've got to be planned, we've got to be scheduled, we've got to classify, we've got to organize, we've got to do this, and to meet all the responsibilities and demands of life. And in the process of so doing, we neglect the right brain, the artistic, the spatial, the wonder, the magical component of who we are. And what we're ultimately talking about is an integration of those two things from a brainwave state standpoint, but also the effect that has on our experience of life, and coming back to that wonder. It's no surprise to me that left brain kind of aspect of living is devoid of magic, is devoid of the essence of life and wonder and things of that nature. And I think that's a big part of that longing, is we want to get back to that vitality, that wonder, that the sense of awe that life offers us. And once we taste that, we're like, oh, well, that's what it was. That's what I've been longing for. That's what I'm really interested in having experienced. And from that standpoint, you simultaneously experience an expansion of who you are in that moment, that you're not that real finite laser targeted focus and control on surface issues that we think are so important, and how to navigate and operate this life. And we kind of zoom out and see that it's so much more than that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that that's a significant portion of the state of being that I experience, is this zooming out and perspective that is so much wider and expansive than when I'm navigating daily life otherwise, and thinking about all the responsibilities that I have. I'm able to zoom out and see those responsibilities for what they are, and not be so swept up in the kind of grit my teeth, just need to bear down and work harder and focus on these things. No, I in that expanded perspective, I ultimately allow and am open to a way of being that enables me to flow through those responsibilities in a way that is more engaged and more fully alive and more present, that it's hard to really translate to someone who's not already experienced those kinds of things. But I think that
translation,
by talking about it, you get a sense of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, translation comes to the intellect, try to explain it to another intellect, which is not the place that we're talking about, right? So that's they're looking and wondering why. It leads me to another question that's popped up, is like we hear all the time, being drives doing. You have to be at a certain place to do what you want to do. Well, why is it that we can't think our way into higher states like joy, confidence, and creativity? Why can't we? I mean, there's plenty of books written. Again, I talked about this earlier in the show, but why doesn't that work? We want it to work because it would be the simple solution, right? But why doesn't that work?
Well, let's start with simple examples. Think about a runner's high. You know, if you run, you jog, you get your high because of the muscles, because of the dopamine released. So that's a promise, and that's the assurance. Now you get to a more slippery, situation when you have the state of flow. You have to really clench your teeth and focus on your work, and then you may get that window for about 20, 25 minutes when you will be in the flow state, but it's not guaranteed. So the higher you go, the more complex that heightened state is, the less the assurance you get that you will get there. Otherwise, we all will be walking around, speaking in tongues, experiencing all sorts of but think about this, right? It's like, hey, it's easy, walk in spirit, do this, be grateful, rejoice. I mean, we have been bombarded by all those expectations, but we cannot meet those expectations using our willpower. We cannot just tell our brain, okay, I've got 5 minutes. I want to get high quality of sleep, meditation, everything combined. And when I come out of it, I should be in bliss. You can't do that, right? You can't just program yourself. Now, same thing especially with avid meditators, spending decades and decades, so they can go into that meditative state very quickly. But that bliss is not guaranteed even to them. Because I did drill down on that with them. I said, can you go into that heightened state, the ineffable? Can you just switch gears and kind of really get high? And I said, look, if you want to do that, you just start microdosing, or you start, get yourself some cheap shrooms and you'll get into that heightened bliss. So this is the reality that we have today. I mean, right now, there are lots of people who are trying to engineer various combinations of sounds to put our brain or trick our brain into that heightened state. I mean, on TikTok, I see these people every day. Oh, I've come up with a formula. It's this. Oh, I've got the binaural beats. It's that. You just kind of listen to the sound and that frequency, and it'll put you at that heightened state and you'll be flying. Okay. So we are surrounded by all of this. But how come we're not in charge of our own happiness? We're not in charge of our own state that we can shift gears and say, hey, it's mine. And Ryan actually made an interesting observation. You did make an interesting observation because you decided to cling to the memory of the state, to deepen it and extend it further, which was a very wise thing to do because our brain, our body would remember that. Okay, I see, I feel, I process that state as something as being quite significant. So I would like to anchor myself in that state and then maybe reconstruct it later or revisit it later. So this is a good approach to that because if certain brainwave states could be reconstructed with certain frequencies, that's what Monroe Institute does, right? So they've captured certain states and they can reprogram the brain and we can go there. The only issue is, what do we get out of that? Is it a simulated state or is it really a true state? Is it really a rise in consciousness or is it just a simulated thing? Okay? Am I speaking in tongues or am I saying garbage? I mean, look, how do we know, right? Think about this. So that's why, we can constantly check if the process or the experience is valid enough, is really true from our perspective. Because it may feel like, oh, it's kind of fake, or it's kind of there, but it's not really there. I'm not getting anything deep out of it, right? So we constantly juggle all that. So the reason I started with an example of the runner's high, this is a very simple experience, which is almost always guaranteed, just like the dopamine rush, doom scrolling, doing stuff like that. We want to get that instant gratification as soon as we just start doing something simple. But when it comes to a level of complexity where we go and say, oh, wait a minute, this is a divine moment. I can almost sense the divinity of what I am experiencing. Because it's not something that I experience every year, or, okay, let's say it every decade, right? That's something that's really extraordinary. How can I grab and run with it? How come I cannot retain it? Why does it have to be so fleeting? And this is where, we start really asking those questions. And the idea is, what do we need to do to own the moment? Being in the present moment is good enough. But if I get to those heightened states, how do I learn to own it? And like you said, Ryan, how do I learn to keep it? How can I lock it in? And that's where the real beauty is. What does it take to actually get there?
All the things that we attempt to do, psychedelics, various drugs, extreme sports, all these things are attempts to return to this place. And yet they're not stable. We have the experience and we can tap into the memory of that experience. So that's psychedelic integration is about tapping into what did you learn? How can you bring that alive more in yourself? But even those attempts may have slivers of improvement in our life, but it's not holistic. As I'm also thinking about the listeners out there, as we're comparing kind of this home, but it could be confused that all those people that try that stuff, because I never do that stuff, that's just escapism. Isn't this escapism? Trying to become a kid again? I got stuff to get done. I got pressures. Aren't you guys talking about just escaping? What would you say to that?
Yeah, to validate a little bit of what you're saying, 10 to 12 years ago, I jumped out of a plane at about 14,000 feet. And I told myself going into this experience that not only did I think it would be neat and exciting, and I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but I thought if I have the courage to jump out of a plane, I will never experience fear again. So it was that desire to basically return home,
Become
so to
fearless.
speak,
Yeah.
and say, like, if I can do that, then I can master anything and not let fear affect me. So I can certainly validate that from my own internal mechanisms and what I was attempting to do.
And that's a conscious move to do that. I think a lot of times people just want to do it or just want to feel for that moment something they're not experiencing in their life. Why would you jump out of a plane at 14,000 feet? Even if you didn't have that intention or take risks with drugs or other things, we do it because that dopamine rush, that experience of flow, that momentary elation reconnects us to our core self. And to close out this section, we chase after that with our intellect. And it just can't be achieved because kids were not, as Anatoly pointed to, they were in theta state. They were fully in the moment. They weren't thinking about things. They were experiencing the present moment fully and embracing it, whatever emotion they were in. But any comments on what I said about the escapism part of it? Is this like you're just trying to do something that isn't real, it isn't practical?
I think a part of that is our internal messenger that's probably a little unconscious or subconscious to us that recognizes that the state of being that we most often preoccupy, which is this kind of teeth-gritted, stressful, kind of get to the next thing moment, is unsustainable and continues to deplete us in our energy reserves on a regular basis. And I think so, whether we're conscious or unconscious of that, the escapism helps us escape that and potentially return to that presence and awareness that we're talking about. At least that's how I perceive it. Anatoly probably has a much deeper perspective on that.
Well, I'll just keep it simple. Think about this. Almost everyone at some point wants to validate, is there anything to my life that goes deeper than what I have experienced so far? Can I connect with a part of me that's kind of like sacred, or it sits there almost like a beacon of something? And I'd like to have it, to myself. So that's why when you were talking about your experience, I was thinking about this concept of homecoming, because the idea is that it's part of us and how we see ourselves that we can revisit, and it's pure and it's untouchable. And it actually is very, very meaningful to us personally. And that's going to create this conundrum that we have. You may talk about your personal experience. I may talk about my personal experience. And I've had wicked experiences. But it will not resonate with you, right? Because you say, here's this Russian guy, kind of crazy, but we tolerate him on the show, stuff like that, right? So the idea is that personalized experiences, they may not resonate with other people. Now, you look up there and you see like religion. Well, that's a huge institution, right? You can easily get lost. Do you want to become part of it? You don't become like subjugated to the greater will out there. And then you start thinking like, okay, I'm looking for something that's greater than an individual and that can resonate with me. So the validity of that would be palpable, would be something that I would like to process. So it has to transcend the boundaries of individual. So it's no longer personalized experiences, right? But at the same time, it should be smaller and compact so that it would sit and be available as the contextual framework for me. So that's why I'm not reinventing the wheel here. Because Carl Jung, he looked at that and he already discovered that way back. He said, hey, it's all about the self, the integrating of the conscious and the subconscious part of our psyche. And that idea of that idealized home, this is where our psyche gets integrated. That's how we get connected to that cosmic concept. And we extend ourselves from being just an individual. So you see the idea, right? This is like, okay, so now it's no longer just about me. When I reconnect to myself being 7, it's the blueprint of me. But this is the idea what I like. It's no longer about talking about matters spiritual. I want to connect with my soul. I want to do what my soul wants. No. We're talking about this physical body at this point in time that has a certain blueprint. All emotions we can experience through taste, smell, tactile, bodily sensations. They are available to us only in this physical. Our soul and spiritual matters could be parked aside. Let's focus on that. What can I get out of this fleeting moment of my experience? And this is that heightened state. Suddenly, you can reconnect to the purity of your childhood. Not certain drama moments we experienced when we were 6 or 7, right? But it's almost like a snapshot of that ideal childhood. And suddenly that blueprint comes to life and is vibrant, and we can reconnect and process. But it also comes with the surrounding motive, with the environment of being that ideal home, which is another transient experience, right? It's going to give you goosebumps when you think about it, right? It's almost like music chills. So this is the idea, it's the home. And it all belongs to you. There's nobody else but you. It's yours. It sustains you. Like Sigmund Freud said, like, oh, it's just the womb of Mother Earth. This is, you just want to be safe there. Well, it's more than that. It's the idea of a home, which is much more pure than that. And then we want to have that snapshot of us being in that ideal home. And it's not about something we missed. It's not about something that we want to recreate. No, it's just an ideal, but it's also connecting us to the future. It does not deny us our adulthood, what we have, all the lessons we learned. It's accepting us at every level. So that's why it's almost like we're caught in that transition of going through. That's why I like it. It's so much different from any religious fervor or experience and stuff like that. It actually sits somewhere at the intersection of psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, mythology, and it's an overlap. It's a sweet spot that nobody really was able to revive. Yes, they called it, like psychology would call it, like affective learning from the category of life learnings, right? And then the neuroscience would describe how it all works with the neurotransmitters and everything, like going through our brain. But the trouble is, even if they can break it down in steps and say, like, this is what's happening, the idea is like, well, how come nobody can recreate it to my specifications? So I want to be fully in charge and in control. That's what I think is so magical about it. And the idea is that I like that concept. That's why, Ryan, when you mentioned that, I was thinking to myself, okay, this is the moment when I need to start talking about something like this, which is different from New Age, religion, and all this kind of like chemically induced experiences.
Yeah, and Anatoly, you mentioned something that I think is critical to this state of being, is this concept of unconditionally accepting something. Being unconditionally accepting. And I think that's the barrier for that state of being, is we're constantly navigating our world to say, I accept this or I don't accept this. And so we rail and fight against certain things that don't resonate with us necessarily, or are an offense to us, or, emotionally attack us. And we feel like we need to be protecting of that. And so all of the non-acceptance is what takes us further and further away from this state of being, where that full unconditional acceptance is a part of that state of being that I think is prevalent and is so important in terms of how you experience that state and a part of maintaining that state. And so that's not lost on me, that term of acceptance versus unacceptance. And hopefully, by my intuition saying that I need to share about that particular point, someone else has also recognized that in their state of being and how they're assimilating what we're sharing with them. Is acceptance and unacceptance, or resistance rather, is a big part of what we're talking about.
Going back to the thing about escapism and what you said about we're in control of it, resources, it's the core foundation of who we are. That if you think about a radio station, it was tuned to a fine frequency when we were kids of being more connected to it, the imaginary friend or whatever it is, or being spontaneous and in the moment, that the radio's gotten jumbled and we've gotten static and things that are in the way of that. And it's absolutely who we are. And we have access to this power and enjoyment that is there and is natural. And what you were just pointing to, Ryan, we've done all these things to try to figure our way back from it, but we made it overly complex. And going back to your experience, when you're there, you're just there. You don't have to find your way back. You're just there. And when you're there, everything is integrated and holistic. And you have that zoom out that you talked about. And you have this sense of being present and paying attention to what's happening right now and finding enjoyment in it. And my experience of this is, again, it's a simple example of, am I being called to my to-do list because it has to get done? Or am I being called to what I feel motivated, inspired, spontaneously directed to? And it's funny because I'm an entrepreneur. So my to-do list is created by me. I don't have anybody telling me what to do. It's much simpler for me. But I find that now it's just, I'm going to do what this moment I feel called to do. And then I can pour everything into that. And it's like playing again.
Some listeners might be making a very binary distinction between what you're saying. Oh,
Yes.
This guy sounds like he's going to choose the fun over the responsibility. And that's not what you're saying whatsoever. You just have a more clear choice. And when you approach those responsibilities, you have more vitality and energy within you to apply to those responsibilities. It's not like you're choosing fun over responsibility whatsoever.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I didn't want the listeners to get confused there about it. But it's true. I can see how a listener would think, well, you're just doing what you want fun. You got stuff to do. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Well, let's talk a little bit about, I want to, we've kind of named the longing, and I think we did a good job of hopefully tuning people into, I've got that in myself. So let's look at what actually becomes available when we meet the longing or the longing gets satisfied. And, so what we're talking about is an integration, not a black and white thing. As we said, we can still have the experience, the desires, the aspirations, the life that's around us with, all the things that are part of that, the people we love, the work we enjoy doing, et cetera, but with this childlike state of being. So what becomes possible when we reintegrate that? What specific qualities become available to, let's say, an executive dealing with what they're dealing with today? What's possible that isn't possible before integration? What happens and what unfolds?
I can only speak to my experience and tell you that I'm more conscious of my emotional states. I'm more conscious of my internal brain chatter and the impact that has on my energy levels. And as a result of being more conscious, then I recognize the choice that I always have. And the choice is to continue to perpetuate that same thinking or that same emotionality, or stand back and observe, why am I thinking the way I'm thinking? Is that serving me? What created those thoughts? What created those emotions from those thoughts? And then from that standpoint, I once again am the controller. I'm the operator. I'm the observer that recognizes all of these things. And I'm not living unconsciously and flowing with all the manipulation of the external world that is designed to create certain outcomes in me. I get to operate those things. I get to see how people are trying to manipulate. I get to see how people are trying to control. And as a result of that, I have much more agency over my life. And I think that term is really important, is agency, because I don't know that people have a full embracing understanding of that agency and exist within that agency. I think a lot of people, there's a popular term out there that's not very well received, is there's a lot of sheep out there that just go with the flow. They're led around by the nose by other people. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean it only in a very factual way that you can observe this. That a lot of people are not self-conscious in terms of understanding why they do what they do and how they do it and the meaning behind it and the purpose behind it. They're just just being led around by the nose in terms of what messages are being constantly shared with them. And most people want that agency for themselves, but whether or not they have the depth and recognition and consciousness to recognize how they're oftentimes being manipulated, and that they truly are the ones that call their own tune, if they're awake and aware enough to be able to do that.
Well, that was just such a great description of self-awareness and the power of self-awareness. Your first part of that description, I could either choose to react to the situation based on how I'm feeling, or I could step back and look at what it is. And I'm not saying that as instructing people how to do self-awareness. What I'm pointing to is when you're in that natural state, you just are more self-aware and able to step back and zoom back, as you said earlier, and say, maybe I should look at this before I make a decision or I act. It's natural. And what I'm seeing is more and more, all leadership development, all self-awareness and mindfulness training, a lot of meditation practices aim to grow self-awareness. But what you just described is the ability to connect to the self, which is aware, which is self-awareness. Self-awareness is getting connected to the self that's aware, that's observing, not just so you can be more attentive to protocol. Oh, I got to make sure that I'm attentive to protocol. I'm being self-aware. I'm being conscientious, which is a lower level of that, right? Of making sure I'm politically correct. That's not self-awareness. That's
Well
again
said.
locked into the same prison that we're saying can be released when you step into this natural part of yourself that's already there, knows how to do all this. You don't have to read books on self-awareness. Now, meditation can be a benefit. I enjoy meditation, mindfulness practice. I still do. Take a moment, take a deep breath. Because I'm connected to that childlike part of me, the mindfulness thing is just like a trigger to step back into my natural state. It's natural. It goes back to, we own this place. This is not something we're escaping to. This is something we're have a possibility of reintegrating so that we're more powerful, resourceful, fulfilled, and effective. It's like we have this amazing way of being that's available to us. And if it can figure out a way to turn that on consistently, we're better for it. Everybody else around us is better for it. Any thoughts as we were sharing until you wanted to drop in at this point?
Well, you mentioned those qualities stemming from the state. And Ryan, you started right with the energy. So I want to start with the energy because it's perfectly tied into the emotional regulation, how you distribute your energy, which means that that's going to affect your productivity. And usually when people say that suddenly they have a rise up to 30 to 40% in their productivity, running business, running people, stuff like that, suddenly they kind of like really be on top of things. And that's going to be tied into a very important issue because it helps to offset burnout. Because the way you manage your energy, emotional, physical, whatever, it's like you get those early warning signs. Hey, you're getting close to getting burned out. Change whatever you're doing, take a step, because usually people get lost in this process. Before they know it, they wake up and they have burnout. And then they need okay, I need to go on sabbatical, take half a year off to recuperate. Okay, so I'll get back. We'll talk again about that presentation next week, right? It's not going to work like that. Now, but then other elements are pretty critical. Anything that sits in the theta band is energy, confidence that's really connected to self-awareness, heightened creativity. Now, imagine about if you start combining them, right? You have a combo, sharper focus, mental clarity. You start lumping all that together, all those intangible benefits. Suddenly, because of the synergistic component, you get extra mileage out of that. And then you're on top of things. Hey, I just can go and get great sleep, 6 hours straight. I don't wake up. I don't think about my work. I just switch off and I wake up and I'm fully recharged. That's what people keep reporting. And then you think about just two things, they say, just two things. Give me my sleep and give me my energy. I don't care about the rest. Just give me those two and I'll be a Superman. But we usually say hey, what about other things? There's lots of other things attached. And then again, sometimes the thing you're talking about the agency, which is a very critical component because sometimes when we are lost in our communication with people, especially with our dear narcissistic friends, they'll be walking all over us, right? Before we know it, right? So our agency will be lost in a heartbeat. So that's why this component is pretty critical. Self, my autonomous self, what I do, how I distribute my energy, how I manage my time, how I stay focused, how I can, like you, David, said, how can I enjoy staying focused on stuff I hate? Well, not hate, maybe it's a strong word, but something I don't really enjoy. So you see, I'm just giving you just a scratch on the surface of the very basic elements, because I think once we counted 25 intangible benefits that could be converted into some sizable return on investment, way going over 2,000, 3,000% once combined and for any particular role.
It's so true. I was thinking about your comment about narcissists, and I think I shared back in the show a number of episodes before. Dan, who's a real estate executive, sharp as a tack, knows his stuff, was reporting to that narcissist. And it was just like turning him inside out, because they can drive you nuts, absolutely nuts. Even really talented people get driven nuts because it's like, why are you wasting my time? What are you doing? Right. And after the reset, not a problem. I see what he's up to. I'll figure this work around. I know how to get him now, but not in a way that's overt, because you don't do it to avert with narcissists. You just have to like hold their feet to the fire or humor them so they can go through their thing. Completely changed for him. And that was because he had agency over himself. He wasn't controlled by the reaction to him. Just think about that. If you're not controlled by the reactions of others and you're simply in your place of center, that's ROI, right? And that's what a kid is. Again, you're not taking your clothes off because you're hot, because you have the experience, the expertise, the abilities of an adult that knows that's probably going to cause more harm than good. That's just common sense. But you have the ability to be playful in that moment and crack a good joke or listen deeply to a friend or get stuff done. And we don't have to go into a lot of detail. I think people get what this brings to you. So we've talked about like the pain of not having that, the longing that we want to have it, and the gifts that come from it. So now let's talk about how you do it. How do you bring this forward in a consistent way so that this shift actually happens? Not only happens because you take some microdosing or you jump out of a plane or you have the moment of flow, but then it disappears. How do you make this last? And I think that's where the resilient leader method comes in. I don't know of anything out there that is consistent. And one of the things that people always report consistently is, I still have all this stuff going on. I seem to have more agency over it, but I feel like a kid. Can you imagine? So people go through this process. How does it bring them back to this home of curiosity, ease, vibrancy, while maintaining this groundedness in their maturity, wisdom, and experience that they've gained? What does this process do to help people reconnect to home and then look out as an adult and see what's possible that wasn't possible before, because they're in that place that now they can do something about it and they don't have the brakes on anymore? How does this process rewiring support that natural outcome?
Well, there are two ways of going about it. One is like official. When you go to the Department of Education, get your puberty blockers, and then you play with them and see if it can bring back the child in you. Well, sorry I just wanted to indulge myself.
I love it.
Well, another idea is basically this. It all starts with, the resonance, right? So the way we resonate with anything that's the external to us and brings us in that state of coherence. Now, we go into theta, right? The theta opens up all the doors at once, all of them. But one thing that stands in the way, we still need to shed and get rid of our baggage. All the blockages, negative, trauma, all of that stuff that needs to go, because otherwise you could be an enlightened person in a way, but like totally rotten through and through because of all the stuff that you've been like pushing in your pockets, right? All your bad experiences, all this stuff. Even the way it works, you may not even remember that. But your subconscious mind, like you, Ryan, said, it always remembers the route, remembers what to do. So you don't know that. You think you are on top of the world, but all that stuff is like really dragging you down. Okay, so you have to do some spring cleaning. So when that's done out of the door, then you have to do, which is a precursor to the homecoming, as the good wish list, to have your own perspective of how you would like to see your life unfold for you. Okay. So that's the idea. So then you tackle that. And then what's going to happen? Here is the magical component, because without that, it won't work. You may get this heightened state. You may do this and that, but like you, Ryan, said, it kind of dissipates and comes down in a few hours later. How do you lock in that state and you stay there? This is when the neuroscience says that the so-called, we talked about that, neurons that fire together, wire together. The rule that you need to really lock our brain in replicating that state. Okay. And that is really important. It's called LTP, long-term potentiation, is the thing that locks us in that state. Now, of course, it's just a technicality, but it does work with the whole perception. And the last but not the least, well, the shift of consciousness is really required. Otherwise, all that stuff remains transient. You experience it and you snap out of it and you just have a memory, but you cannot really bring it back and make it work for you. So the shift in consciousness basically has been well researched by Hameroff and Penrose. And that's why it just all happens in the microtubule level inside the neurons, which actually creates the consciousness as it is for us. So when you have a shift, during the shift, you upgrade your neural correlates. And technically, you're a new self. That's why this whole thing about connecting with the childlike self becomes accessible to us. We can go back and recreate that state. But that state is important just to tell us that, okay, so here is something I have, and that's very precious to me. And that's a sort of a level of assurance that what I have made available to myself, I can actually do something with it. And that's why the whole idea is that, okay, the neuroscience tells us it's almost like this instant neuroplasticity that occurs, which technically the name, if we shop around for the name for it, it's a functional synaptic plasticity for what the brain goes through in response to the external sound stimuli. And so that's what happens to the brain. Of course, it goes deeper than that. But if we lock in and we walk away from any religious components or anything that's sort of like out there in the fringe kind of like area, so we'll just say like, okay, this is the experiential description of what it is. And the only thing that is difficult to explain, and that's what people say, how do you make it stick? You could create all sorts of experiences, right? I could be guzzling ayahuasca like all day long. Right. And that experience that, well, of course, there's no guarantee for that. I mean, it may kill you in the first half of the day, but the idea is that it's not like you push that button like a dog, Pavlov's dog. I want to salivate, right? Keep pushing the button or the bell, keep ringing that bell. You cannot really do that, right? So they say like, how do you make it stick? And the idea is that the level of resonance is needed to go with me with that level of resonance, right? That will create a new blueprint for a person to retain that resonance and keep recreating it at that level. That's what makes it work.
Another thing I want to point back to something that was talked about at the beginning of the show with brainwaves. You're always operating in theta state, and that's measurable and measured, right? People know that exists. That's just a fact. You can measure that. So your brainwave is always in theta. Well, what are we at it when we're kids? We're living in theta. When that spontaneity, that oneness, and that's when we operate out of that state, we're more in the moment, more creative. It opens up healing in the human being. And that's what you're resonating with. So Anatoly, living in theta all the time, again, measurable, provable. We have no problem with that. That can be pointed to. And that coheres because alpha and beta, which most adults are in, are less coherent states, and the brain craves coherence. Linda LeBlanc shared that on a show we had recently when I interviewed her for the Monroe Institute, said that the brain craves coherence. So it will go towards a more coherent state. So when you engage with Anatoly, you're cohering to a state. Now that state also opens you up to pull the roots up, and Anatoly shared, pull the roots up from the thing that are no longer serving you. All these ways that we've got lost, the static on the radio, if you're going back to that metaphor, pulls the static out and then creates fertile ground to plant new seeds. And why you bring new seeds, or your wish list, your joy list, your aspirations that say, this is what I want to replace with those now pulled up roots with all open ground. I want to plant these things, right?
And from a mechanistic standpoint, or the people that think in a mechanistic or engineering kind of perspective, Anatoly, in prior episodes, you've talked about scaffolding. Is that kind of what you're talking about in terms of neural scaffolding and how the resonance creates a new neural scaffolding that maintains and holds that state?
Well, that's what I said. It says that, well, neural scaffolding is a very fancy term. The term that's accepted by the neuroscience is LTP, long-term potentiation. Because to recreate that firing of the neurons, they need to go in resonance with the external object, so to speak. So basically, we need to be stimulated for our brain to start like replicating a certain experience. And that's what makes it work. That's what makes it stick.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We are not trying to like puff out our chest and say, we have the greatest thing since sliced bread and nobody else has it. We haven't found anybody else in the world that does this, right? That's why it's become a cornerstone of our work. I've been in that longing for a long time for myself, but also for others. That's why when I was in leadership development and I found like Bob Anderson's work at Leadership Circle, and he clarified it in research, leadership is a rise in consciousness. It's a reintegration of this true self with our aspirational self. Then the question becomes, how do we get there? And I've been in this work for 25 years. I know, Ryan, you've been in it for a long time too. Never seen anything like this that actually produces these results. So I actually want to get personal today and share a little bit about my recent experience with this, because I was able to go through it for a second time. Now, it's important to note here that a second reset with Anatoly is an exception, not the norm, because our standard is you only get one chance at this. However, Anatoly was compassionate, and he realized my first experience with him occurred before we had fully developed the resilient leader method. So as you can imagine, I met Anatoly one day through a colleague connection of mine who introduced me to him. And much like Ryan, I got on the call, and about 25, 30 minutes into the call, I said, okay, this guy has something. I'm going to have a conversation with him further about this. And then I did my first reset, but I didn't fully grasp the power of it and prepare for it in a way that I now know, after we've had over 20 executives and probably 30 people over the last 2.5 years and are now going through this process, find deepened understanding of how to do this work in a way that maximizes the impact. So we have a preparatory document. We have afterwards, we make sure right after the reset, you write down what happened, because that will serve you as a memory to strengthen your experience of it, as Ryan pointed to at the top of the show. Back then, I really just had a kind of this high level understanding that my issue was imposter syndrome. But since that first reset, I uncovered a more profound truth, that what laid beneath that sense of unworthiness was this raw, buried rage of early childhood, went through and through self-reflection. And then Anatoly made the offer. And so given what I learned, I didn't have my full opportunity in a certain way in my first, because we didn't know what we didn't know. And now I do. I spent 10 hours getting ready for that session, really getting clear on what that was. And I connected to that anger in that child and that toddler version of me. Everybody didn't have to do this, but I did it because I'm taking advantage of this. I'm not going to get another opportunity. And the results of pulling up that route have been just extraordinary. I experienced the top experience of the executives going through this. The brakes just came off. Immediately after the session, I felt this urge of energy and lightness and calmness. I had gotten to the root, which is clear to me. And this wasn't some fleeting high. It's been foundational shift in how I operate. The effervescent, creative, optimistic boy came back. And now he stands side by side with this seasoned man who actually likes himself. To be quite honest, before this rage was lifted, I didn't really like myself much. And so he's ready and he's not holding back, and we'll see what happens. But from the reset, something profound awakened in me, just general self-confidence, as I said. I became more playful and productive, and remarkably, the fog of ADHD lifted. And Gabor Mate talks about ADHD is not a disease. Get over it. It's a trauma response. So the trauma got lifted for me, and my ADHD symptoms went away. I know that sounds remarkable. And I also have the energy of an 8-year-old at 68. And the extra benefit, we talked about sleep. I was getting maybe 1.5, 2 hours of deep sleep a night. And I have an Apple Watch, so I keep track of this. Now I'm getting an average of 4 hours deep sleep a night. And I'm sleeping much more deeply. I'm also haven't snored since then. which is interesting. Just so there's an external source here, my partner noticed right away, she really deeply appreciates my presence now, how much more loving and at ease I am with her. There's more joy, more clarity, more impact, more willingness to be directed. That's what I'll know when a significant other directs us. I just say, okay, honey, I'll do that. I used to be really defensive. So you don't completely become perfect in a certain way, but it really has made an impact. And from this experience, here's what I know in my bones more than I did before I did the second time. This process is priceless. And now, having gone through it with the full weight of awareness, I carry a renewed conviction that we have something really special to offer. This is not a technique. This is not coaching, although coaching supports you afterwards in a very profound way. It's a return home to your core self. It's what home feels like. And it is your experience, life felt experience in your body, which a lot of executives have left a long time ago as they live neck up. Right? So it really truly is life-changing. So I just wanted to share that because it seemed relevant today, because I do feel like a kid again. I wish I looked like a kid again. But I will say my back problems have gotten better too. Anyway, gentlemen, any final thoughts as we close today's show today?
I just want to say that was a powerful testimony, David, and I appreciate your sharing it. And I can certainly resonate with some of what you had shared in terms of your experience, your predisposition, and then the post experience. And I'm delighted that you've had that. And I just really hope that our listeners really took away a lot of our articulation of this experience and what it's done for us. And if you're longing for that, like I know many people are longing for that coming home experience, then this is something worth checking out.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here today. And thanks for your inspiration for the show. Appreciate it.
I want to just mention one thing, which is really interesting. Imagine that the process takes care of so many things, right? And then you learn to appreciate it and all that stuff. And I was confronted by one person who said, like, well, it's got to be a miracle. It's got to be like fully perceived as a miracle if it happens. And I said, no. Think about this. If something close to a miracle happens, our first reaction is to deny it completely because of the cognitive dissonance and all the biases we may have. We will dismiss it out of hand. It has to stay in that gray zone so we could be accepting it. It will be challenging the boundaries of how much we can accept it. But at the same time, we get clear benefits out of it, right? And especially when the hit rate is high enough so we know that the assurance is there. Because I talk to people who do a lot of meditating, especially like Buddhists, right? They say like, well, when we have our teachers, our gurus, so to speak, to do their transmission, the hit rate is rarely above 30, 40. And that's among the most convicted believers. And I was thinking to myself, okay, if we have the kind of controlled environment with all the religious attributes, with all the people who know why they're there and what the expectations are, and the hit rate was so low for the most distinguished spiritual leaders that they have, I was thinking to myself, okay, so we don't have to beat up so hard ourselves. Even if in that controlled environment, the expectation rarely goes above 40% or something. So it's just an observation I wanted to make. When people have expectations within a certain environments, and they get only this much out of it for themselves, but they're happy with the rest of it being ambiguous as this fleeting promise. So people operate on the ratio, which is not all that impactful. So I think that what we're doing here and tightening this, and especially, Ryan, when you look at this from outside and you begin to observe and process what you feel, this is really important. Otherwise, the three of us sitting there, I will be the only one who hasn't gone through the reset. It's like, hey, I haven't gone through the reset. I can be objective. That would be funny, right? So the idea is we have very well balanced audience here. So I just wanted to make that observation.
I'm growing to enjoy these conversations more and more as we have them. And I think we struck gold today with this show that's going to have legs. I have a sense that this series could be foundational to where the show goes, because I think we've tapped into something that's natural to us. It's not just a concept. It's a deep, unshakable longing to return to ourselves, to this natural place. And we've unpacked today how adulthood and survival and overthinking, even though we've been adding to that with more and more data, analytics, and while that has its place, it is not the solution for what we're talking about today. It just isn't. You're not going to think your way into this way of being. You're not going to educate yourself or learn something new that is going to revolutionize your state of experience. And, we've shown that returning to that is not only possible, it may be essential for these times that we're in. So in part 2, we're going to be exploring, more into detail what this state actually is, explore in more depth of what this means and how you can recognize and live from this space in the world. It often pulls you away, and hopefully share some means for those that can't do or aren't ready to do the Resilient Leader method, what you can do to help spark this a little bit more in your life. I also want to invite listeners to come to the show and notice how you feel before the show and how you feel after the show, because we're having a conversation with Anatoly, and Anatoly has the ability through his voice to transmit this. And we're not so I think it's important to emphasize that you may have a little taste if you tune in. If we give enough time to Anatoly talk and I don't interrupt all the time. So what I invite you to do is tune in, and we're going to have other opportunities to do that. We have some other things in the works where you can have a taste test of this, and we'll come out with that soon. But until next time, I want you to consider this. What if you were never broken, just buried? And what if coming home was the bravest, wisest thing you could do to revolutionize not only your life, but your effectiveness as a leader? And today's conversation touched something in you. Share this episode, reflect on your own long. And if you're curious, it doesn't cost anything to have a 30-minute conversation with me about how the method could support you in your path home and to greater leadership. The path to home is already you. This is something you own, not something we're doing to you. We're just lighting the light to help you go down that path and reconnect. And with Anatoly's state of theta, it's able to lift you in all the ways that he said. So thank you again, gentlemen. I appreciate you being here today. And this is David Craig Utts, Leadership Alchemist, signing off. Lead boldly, live fully, be home. Have a great rest of your day.